At 72 years old, I never expected to hear my own daughter tell me I didn't deserve to die in the house I built with my own hands. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Aspen, Colorado. The snow was melting off the pines, leaving the air sharp and clear. I was sitting on the porch of my mountain lodge, the one I'd bought back in the late 80s, for less than most people pay for a starter home today. To me, it was never just a house. It was the promise I'd made to my late wife that we would build something lasting, a place where family could gather and memories could outlive us both. But to my daughter Vanessa, it was nothing more than a $12 million asset waiting to be claimed. She stood in front of me that afternoon, in her fur-trimmed coat, diamond earrings flashing like icicles in the sun, and said words I'll never forget. "The Aspen Lodge has to come to me now. Derek and I need it for our wedding and our future. You can move into something more appropriate." Appropriate. That word sliced deeper than any insult. You see, my name is Richard Caldwell, and for over 4 decades I've worked these mountains, pouring concrete for ski lifts, shoveling roofs after blizzards, managing crews that built half the vacation homes scattered across Pitkin County. I don't wear Italian suits. I drive a 20-year-old Jeep Wrangler with mud on the tires and a cracked windshield. Most people in Aspen glance at me and see a handyman who somehow got lucky. Vanessa, my only daughter, sees me as an embarrassment. She's 35 years old with a closet full of gowns from Milan, a $180,000 Bentley her fiancé Derek gave her for Christmas, and a circle of friends who measure worth by how much champagne you can spill at a gala. She has never swung a hammer in her life. She's never had frostbite on her fingers from working a roof at dawn. Yet she looked at me that day and said, "Dad, you don't understand. Derek's family expects us to live in style. The lodge is perfect. You don't need it anymore." That was the moment I knew the battle lines had been drawn. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I've learned in 72 years that anger only feeds the arrogance of people who think they're entitled. Instead, I nodded slowly, the way a man does when he's already made a silent decision. I let Vanessa think she had won while in my chest, something heavier than rage was settling in. Because that lodge was never just timber and stone. It was where my wife lit the first Christmas fire after we scraped enough money together to buy it. It was where my grandchildren learned to ski. It was where I knelt one snowy night, Bible in hand, promising God I would protect what He had given me, even if no one else understood its worth. And now my own blood was telling me to pack my things and leave. Before I take you further into this story, I want to pause for just a second. If you're listening right now, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because what I'm about to tell you, the way I turned my daughter's demand into the lesson of her life, is something you won't forget. Vanessa believed she was entitled to my lodge because she'd grown up with the best of everything. What she didn't know was that entitlement has a cost. And sometimes the bill comes due in ways no one expects. That day on the porch, I sat quietly while she rattled off wedding plans, interior renovations, and social media posts she would share with her friends once the lodge was theirs. Derek was already talking about how his father's company could manage the property better, how it could be repurposed into a luxury retreat for the Langford dynasty. They thought they were speaking into a future they already owned, but I was already thinking about phone calls I could make, about documents stored in a safe Vanessa had never seen, about truths she had never bothered to ask me. And above all, I was thinking about one simple fact. This old man was not about to be pushed off the mountain he had climbed with his bare hands. When Vanessa left that afternoon, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled, I stayed on the porch, long after the sound of her Bentley disappeared down the mountain road. The air was sharp with pine and melting snow, but my chest was heavier than stone. I walked back inside and sat by the fireplace. The same fireplace my wife Margaret had lit every Christmas Eve until the cancer took her away 10 years ago. I pulled down the old Bible that still sits on the mantel, the one with her handwriting in the margins. And I whispered a prayer just as I did on the night she passed. Lord, give me strength to protect what matters, and patience to know when silence is stronger than shouting. You see, faith has always been the thread that kept me from unraveling. When Margaret was sick, when bills piled up, when crews walked off job sites in the middle of winter storms, I didn't lean on bank loans or big investors. I leaned on the belief that God doesn't put us on this earth to hoard wealth, but to honor what we're given. That lodge wasn't just 4 walls. It was a covenant. A promise I made to my wife when we were both young and struggling, that someday we'd have a place that felt like ours. Not a vacation home, not a rental unit, not a showpiece for Instagram, a home. And I swore before God that I'd never let greed, not even from my own flesh and blood, tear that promise apart. But sitting there with Margaret's handwriting staring back at me, little notes like trust, even when tired, and patience is also strength, I felt the sting of betrayal cut deeper than the mountain cold. Because I realized my daughter had never once asked me why the lodge mattered. She only asked what it was worth. The truth is, Vanessa was raised in comfort, and maybe that was my mistake. She went to private schools in Denver where tuition cost more than I earned in a year when I was her age. I paid for piano lessons, ski camps, study abroad trips in Paris. Every bill I covered. Every dream I financed. I thought giving her everything would teach her gratitude. But faith teaches us something different. When you hand someone everything you risk, teaching them the value of nothing. That realization hit me harder than her demand. I saw how far she'd drifted from the girl who once roasted marshmallows in this fireplace, laughing with sticky fingers, to the woman who looked me in the eye and said I didn't deserve to die in my own home. And I'll admit to you, for the first time in years, I felt tempted to lash out. To tell her the truth about who really owned what, about the holdings she didn't even know existed. To remind her that money doesn't come from hashtags and champagne flutes. But then I ran my hand over Margaret's handwriting and heard her voice in my memory. Patience, Richard. Let people show you who they are. Then you'll know how to act. So I didn't call Vanessa that night. I didn't argue or explain. Instead, I sat in the stillness of the lodge, listening to the crackle of the fire, and let my anger burn down into something colder, clearer. I realized something important. My daughter didn't just want the lodge. She wanted the legacy, and she thought all she had to do was demand it. But legacies aren't inherited. They're lived. And she had no idea what it had cost me, the nights without sleep, the winters without heat, the sweat, the sacrifice, the prayers whispered into frozen air to build what she now called hers. That night I closed the Bible, set it back on the mantel, and made a quiet vow. If Vanessa was going to learn what legacy meant, she wouldn't learn it through lectures. She would learn it the hard way. And when she did, she would never forget. The next few weeks felt like watching a storm roll in over the Rockies. At first it was subtle clouds gathering in the distance, the air turning sharp. Then suddenly the thunder was on top of me. Vanessa started referring to the Aspen Lodge as if it were already hers. I'd overhear her on the phone saying things like, "Oh yes, when Derek and I move into the family property," or "We're renovating the lodge right after the wedding." She even corrected a friend once when they called it my dad's place. She laughed and said, "Well, technically it's mine now." It was like watching someone erase me from my own story. Then came the posts. Vanessa loved to show off her life online. Photos of champagne brunches at the Little Nell ski trips to Courchevel, and dinners at restaurants where the bill for two would cover a month's wages for most families. She started tagging pictures from the lodge with captions like, "Our forever home in Aspen," or "Future Mrs. Langford estate life." Each time I sat at the kitchen table with my old flip phone in my pocket and thought, she's not just dreaming, she's planting flags. But the moment that cut deepest came one Saturday night. I was upstairs reading when I heard voices downstairs. Laughter, clinking glasses, music. I walked down and found 50 people in my lodge, strangers in tuxedos and gowns holding crystal flutes of Dom Perignon. Vanessa had thrown a party without asking me. A grand, glittering event she called a pre-engagement soiree. Derek was at her side in a velvet jacket, shaking hands like he already owned the place. I stood in the doorway for a long minute, invisible in my own home. Then I heard her voice rise above the chatter to Aspen Ridge. Soon to be our forever home. The guests cheered. Glasses clinked. Derek kissed her hand, and for a moment you'd think the deed had already been signed. That was the night I realized this wasn't just entitlement. It was a campaign. My daughter wasn't waiting for an inheritance. She was staging a takeover. I walked back upstairs, sat at my desk, and pulled open the drawer where I keep old photo albums. Pictures of Vanessa as a girl, bundled in snow gear, her cheeks red from sledding. Pictures of Margaret holding her in front of this same fireplace. My throat tightened as I flipped the pages. How had we gone from that little girl with sticky fingers and hot chocolate mustache to this woman who would open my doors to strangers and toast to my disappearance? I could have stormed down and thrown every guest out. I could have shouted until the mountains echoed with my anger. But instead I heard Margaret's voice again in memory. Let people show you who they are. Then act. So I let them toast. I let them laugh. I let my daughter believe she had won. Because every storm has a breaking point. Later that night, when the lodge finally emptied and I was alone again, I walked out onto the deck. Snowflakes had started falling, dusting the railings and the pines. I looked up at the dark sky and whispered to myself, appropriate. That was the word she used. Appropriate. For her, appropriate meant the old man moving aside. For me, appropriate meant something else entirely, teaching her that some mountains can't be bought and some legacies can't be claimed by force. The storm was here, and I was ready. The morning after that party, I walked through my own lodge like a guest cleaning up after strangers. Empty glasses on the counters, wine stains on the oak table, a broken lamp in the corner. The scent of perfume and expensive cigars still clung to the air. I moved slowly from room to room, each step heavier than the last. This wasn't just about a party. It was about erasure. My daughter had turned my home into her stage, and I had been reduced to the background. I sat down in the living room where the fire had long gone out, the ashes cold and gray. That's when it hit me. This was no longer just a family dispute. This was betrayal. Vanessa wasn't asking, she was taking. And Derek, with his slick smile and his promises of management, was the architect of it all. They saw me as an old man who wouldn't fight back, too tired or too sentimental to stand in their way. But let me tell you something. At 72, I may walk a little slower. My hair may be silver, my hands marked with decades of work. But I'm not done. And I've learned that sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. I know many of you listening have faced your own betrayals. Sometimes from strangers, sometimes from those closest to you. And I want to pause here just for a moment to ask you something from the heart. Type A1 in the comments. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most, I want to know I'm not alone. Because betrayal has a way of making you feel isolated, like you're the only one foolish enough to be blindsided. But the truth is, it happens in families every day. The people you raise, the people you love, sometimes they're the very ones who test your patience, your dignity, and your faith in humanity. That night, after cleaning up the last of the glasses, I stood at the window and looked out at the mountains. The snow was falling heavy now, soft and silent, burying every trace of the party. The land was reclaiming itself, covering the footsteps, the tire tracks, the noise. And I realized nature has a way of teaching us patience. A storm can cover arrogance in a single night. A snowfall can erase 1,000 footprints. All you have to do is wait. But waiting didn't mean doing nothing. No, waiting meant preparing. Because I knew Vanessa and Derek weren't finished. They would push harder. They would bring paperwork, lawyers, and pressure. They'd try to box me in with polite words that hid sharp edges. And when that moment came, I would be ready. I walked back to my study, opened the drawer where I kept my files, and laid my hand on the thick folder labeled Alpine Holdings. My daughter had no idea what those 2 words meant. No idea what was in those pages. But soon she would. And when the time came, she wouldn't just see me as her father. She'd see me as the man who built something too big for her greed to swallow. For now, though, I closed the drawer and turned off the light. The snow kept falling outside, covering the world in silence. And I thought to myself, let them believe they've won. The real fight hasn't even started yet. The papers arrived on a Wednesday morning. A courier in a black suit pulled up the mountain road in a brand new Mercedes, stepped onto my porch, and handed me a thick envelope sealed with the Langford family crest. He didn't say a word, just gave me a polite nod like he was delivering a wedding invitation instead of a threat. Inside, the letterhead gleamed with gold ink, Langford and Associates. I sat at my old oak desk and read line after line of legal language that boiled down to one message: transfer ownership of the Aspen Lodge to Vanessa Caldwell and Derek Langford within 30 days or face formal proceedings. They called it a natural inheritance adjustment. They wrote about ensuring long-term property stewardship by the next generation. But make no mistake, it was an eviction notice dressed up in silk. Vanessa's handwritten note was paper-clipped to the front. It said, "Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Derek's father says you can't maintain the taxes forever. We'll cover your moving expenses and find you something smaller, more suitable for your age, more suitable for my age." I put the letter down and stared out the window. The taxes on the lodge were $38,000 a year. I'd paid them on time every year for 15 years. But my daughter genuinely believed I couldn't possibly afford it, that I was surviving on scraps, too stubborn to admit I was drowning. That's when I realized just how deep their arrogance ran. I didn't call Vanessa. I didn't call Derek. Instead, I unlocked the steel safe in my study, the one no one in my family had ever seen opened. Inside were the documents I'd been guarding for decades, articles of incorporation for Alpine Holdings, 1984. Property deeds for mountain cabins, ski chalets, and resort parcels across Colorado, Montana, and Utah. Financial statements showing assets north of $120 million. Vanessa thought the Aspen Lodge was my life's crown jewel. She didn't know it was just one piece on a board I'd been building for 40 years. I spread the papers across the desk, the crackle of old documents filling the quiet room. As I flipped through them, I felt something shift inside me. The anger that had burned hot the night of the party cooled into something steadier resolve. For years, I had chosen to live simply. My Wrangler, my Walmart flannels, my modest dinners at the local diner. People assumed I was just another retired contractor clinging to a house bigger than his means. And I let them. I found peace in being underestimated. But now that humility was being weaponized against me. My own daughter had mistaken modesty for weakness. I picked up the phone and called my attorney of 25 years, Margaret Jones. "Margaret," I said, my voice calm, "we've got a situation." She listened as I read the letter aloud. Then she sighed and said, "Richard, this isn't just inheritance talk. This is coercion." "Good," I replied. "Then I want you to prepare documents, ironclad ones, because they're about to learn the difference between assumption and ownership." When I hung up, I sat back in my chair, surrounded by evidence of a life's work my daughter had never bothered to ask about. She thought she was playing checkers with an old man too tired to fight. But this wasn't checkers. It was chess. And I'd been playing it longer than she'd been alive. That night, long after the courier's taillights had faded and the mountain had settled into silence, I sat by the fire with the papers spread across the table. Alpine Holdings. 40 years of sacrifice, sweat, and quiet victories written in black and white. Most men in my position would have poured themselves a glass of whiskey and cursed their daughter's name. And I'll admit for a moment I was tempted. Betrayal doesn't just sting, it hollows you. When it comes from blood, it feels like a wound that won't clot. But I didn't pour whiskey. I reached for the Bible that still sat on the mantel pages, softened by my late wife's hands. I opened to a verse I'd underlined years ago during another hard winter, "Be still and know that I am God." I closed my eyes and whispered, "Lord, help me not to answer pride with rage. Help me act with wisdom, not wrath. Give me patience, but also clarity, because my daughter may not know it, but this is a test for both of us." Faith has always been my compass. It kept me steady when Margaret's illness threatened to break me. It guided me when I bought that first foreclosed cabin with nothing but a borrowed truck and a prayer. It reminded me that every nail I hammered, every deal I signed wasn't just for money. It was for legacy, for family. Now that very family was trying to tear it away. As the fire crackled, I thought about Margaret's voice. She used to say, "Don't fight to be right, Richard. Fight to do right." There's a difference. One feeds your ego. The other feeds your soul. If I had shouted at Vanessa, thrown the papers back at her, called Derek every name in the book, it might have felt good for a moment. But what would it teach her? That anger wins arguments, that wealth is just another weapon. No, that wasn't the lesson she needed. She needed to learn that arrogance has consequences, that faith isn't weakness, and that real strength doesn't raise its voice, it simply acts. So I prayed again this time with more resolve, Lord. I won't dishonor what you've given me by throwing it away in a fit of temper. If my daughter is blind to the value of legacy, then let my actions open her eyes. And if she must fall to learn, then let her fall, but let her rise again wiser. When I finished, I felt lighter. Not less hurt, but clearer. I stood, gathered the documents, and locked them back into the safe. My course was set. I wasn't going to argue with Vanessa. I wasn't going to plead bargain or lecture. I was going to act. Quietly, decisively, and in a way she would never forget. Because faith isn't just kneeling in prayer. Faith is also standing up when the storm comes and trusting that God gave you the strength to face it. And that storm, I knew, was about to break wide open. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom in downtown Denver sparkled that night like a jewelry box. Chandeliers dripped with crystal, the carpet muffled every footstep, and violins played waltzes for people who'd never lifted anything heavier than a champagne glass. I walked in wearing my best suit 10 years old, bought off the rack, pressed as neatly as my own iron could manage. I didn't need silk to stand tall. 200 guests filled the room. Politicians, bankers, socialites. And at the center of it all, Vanessa in a gown worth more than my Jeep. Her arm looped through Derek's. She looked radiant, yes, but also untouchable, as though wealth had become her second skin. When the orchestra paused, Derek tapped his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate our engagement. Vanessa and I are thrilled to begin our future together, and with it, we'll soon be taking stewardship of the Caldwell Aspen Lodge, a property dear to this family, and one that will serve generations to come." The room broke into applause. My stomach twisted, but I didn't move. Then Vanessa raised her glass, her smile wide and confident. "To Aspen Ridge," she said. "Soon to be our forever home." That was it. The thunderclap. I rose slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor. Conversations died away. 100 pairs of eyes turned toward me, some curious, some already braced for scandal. "Forgive me," I said, my voice calm but carrying. "But before we toast, I'd like to clarify something." Vanessa's smile faltered. "Dad, please. No, sweetheart. This won't take long." I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped a name. On speaker, the voice of my attorney, Margaret Jones, filled the ballroom. "Richard, is everything all right?" "Margaret," I said, my eyes never leaving Vanessa and Derek, "can you remind me who legally owns the Aspen Lodge in Aspen, Colorado?" She hesitated only a second. "You do, Richard. It's titled under Alpine Holdings, which you founded in 1984. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Derek's confident grin cracked. Vanessa's knuckles whitened on her champagne flute. "And Margaret," I continued, "who also owns the Langford and Associates office building on 17th Street. Another pause. Then Alpine Holdings. The ripple turned into a wave. People leaned in, phones discreetly lifted to record. Derek's father, seated near the front, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I let the silence stretch. Then I looked directly at Derek. "You've been hosting clients in a building I've owned for 15 years. Perhaps you should have done your due diligence before drafting eviction papers for me." Gasps, whispers. Vanessa's face turned crimson. "Dad, stop. You're embarrassing yourself." "No," I said softly. "I'm embarrassing you because you assumed. You assumed your father's modest clothes, his old Jeep, his quiet ways meant he had nothing. You assumed inheritance was entitlement. But assumptions don't change deeds, Vanessa. And they sure don't change ownership. Patricia Langford. Derek's mother rose from her seat, clutching her pearls. This is highly inappropriate. These matters should be discussed privately. I turned to her, my voice still calm. Mrs. Langford, your son announced my property as his inheritance to 200 people tonight. Vanessa toasted to a future built on something she does not own. This became public the moment they opened their mouths. The room was dead silent now, except for the faint hum of cameras recording. I stepped forward, resting both hands on the table before me. For decades, I let people believe I was just another mountain contractor who got lucky with one lodge. I wore flannel while others wore Armani. I drove a Wrangler while others bought Bentleys. And in their arrogance, they mistook humility for weakness. But tonight, the truth is clear. I gestured toward Vanessa and Derek. You don't inherit legacy by demanding it. You earn it by honoring it. And you, my daughter, have forgotten that. Her glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor. Champagne spread like spilled gold, seeping into the cracks. She looked at me wide-eyed, as though seeing me for the first time. I straightened, nodded once to Margaret through the phone, and ended the call. The room erupted into murmurs, some sympathetic, most scandalized. As I walked out of the ballroom, every step felt like the strike of a hammer. My daughter had wanted a stage. I had given her one, but not the performance she expected. The storm had broken, and soon it would sweep everything she thought she owned away. The morning after the engagement party, the mountains looked different. The snow was sharp white under the sun, the air so clear it felt like I could see every ridge for 50 miles. My phone rang at 7:15 a.m., sharp. Richard said, "Margaret, my attorney, are you sure you want to move this fast?" "Faster," I told her. "By sundown, the lodge is no longer mine. And it won't be in the Langford family's hands either." That day I made 3 calls. The first was to a man named Daniel Harris, head of Summit Group, the fiercest competitor the Langfords had in the Rocky Mountain real estate game. For 20 years, Summit and Langford had been locked in a silent war over ski resort parcels, luxury hotels, and high-value mountain retreats. Richard Harris said when he picked up, "This is a surprise. I thought you only called when you wanted to play golf." "Not today," I said. "I've got something you want." By noon, his private jet was wheels down in Aspen. By 2, we were sitting at my dining room table, the same table Vanessa had wanted to rip from my hands, with papers spread across it. The deal was simple: the Aspen Lodge. 2 ski chalets near Vail. A resort parcel just outside Jackson Hole. 4 properties bundled together for one reason: to make the Langfords bleed. 45 million, Harris said, his voice steady cash. No contingencies, close within 24 hours. I extended my hand. Done. We shook on it. My calloused work rough hands against his manicured ones. But in that moment, I had the leverage. Not him. Not the Langfords. Me. By the time the sun set, wire transfers had cleared. Ownership deeds filed. The properties were gone from my portfolio, slipped like snow through the Langfords' fingers and into their rival's vault. The news broke that evening. Retired mogul outsmarts billionaire heir $45 million sale to Summit Group in record time. Phones lit up across Denver. The Langford boardroom went into chaos. And my daughter, well, Vanessa called me 13 times in an hour. I didn't answer a single one. At 9:00 p.m., Derek himself showed up at the lodge. His Lamborghini's engine echoed off the trees as he pulled into the driveway. He stormed up to the porch, face red, jaw clenched. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he spat. I leaned against the railing, calm as the mountain air. "Yes, I sold property to someone willing to pay full price. That's called business. You sold to Harris." His voice cracked like a boy's. "To our enemy, your enemy," I corrected. "Not mine. I don't fight your wars. I run my own race. You've ruined everything," he said, pointing a finger at me. "My father was counting on those parcels. That lodge was supposed to be ours," I cut him off. "Supposed to be Derek. Nothing in life is supposed to be yours because you want it. Not houses, not fortunes, not people. You don't inherit integrity. You earn it." He froze, chest-heaving words caught in his throat. Finally, he muttered, "You'll regret this." "No," I said quietly. "The only regret I carry is raising a daughter who thought greed was the same as ambition." He left without another word, his tires spitting gravel all the way down the mountain. The next morning, the Denver Post headline made sure everyone in their world saw what had happened. Caldwell Family Lodge transferred to Langford's biggest rival engagement celebration, overshadowed by 45 Vial-Melch blow. I folded the paper and set it on the counter. For the first time in weeks, I smiled, because revenge doesn't always come with raised voices or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes with signatures and wire transfers. Quiet, clean, final. The Langfords thought they could push me out of my own home. Instead, I pulled the ground out from under theirs, and for the first time, Vanessa was about to find out what it really meant to stand on her own, without my money, without Derek's name, and without the house she thought was hers. The storm I'd been waiting for had finally broken, and I was the one holding the lightning. The fallout came faster than an avalanche. By sunrise, the deal was already splashed across every major news outlet in Colorado. Caldwell sells lodge to Summit Group in $45 million coup. Langford dynasty loses key mountain assets overnight. The Langfords, who had spent decades curating an image of invincibility, had been outmaneuvered in less than 24 hours by a man they dismissed as a relic in flannel shirts. And right at the center of the wreckage stood my daughter. Vanessa's phone must have lit up like a bonfire that morning. I didn't have to imagine it, I saw it for myself. She drove up the mountain in her Bentley, tears streaking her mascara, and stormed into the lodge like she still had some claim to it. She held up her phone screen, glowing with messages and missed calls. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking, "do you know what they're saying about me?" I didn't answer right away. I set down my coffee cup, looked her square in the eye, and asked, "Do you know what you said about me?" She flinched. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through headline after headline. Screenshots of her toast at the engagement party were plastered across the internet. Soon to be our forever home was being mocked on Twitter threads and Instagram reels. Commenters didn't see her as glamorous anymore. They saw her as entitled, greedy, blind. Derek hadn't helped matters. By midday, he'd released a carefully worded statement distancing himself from me, from Vanessa, even from the Aspen Lodge. The Langford family regrets the misunderstanding. It went on for paragraphs, but the message was simple. Vanessa was the scapegoat. Her friends weren't kinder. The same people who cheered her on at the party were now silent. Her group chats emptied. The invitations dried up. And then came the contracts. Vanessa had built a side career as a social media darling, sponsored posts for luxury brands, endorsements, partnerships. By lunchtime, at least, 3 of them had cut ties. Her inbox was a graveyard of termination notices. Effective immediately, we are ending our collaboration due to recent events. Your image no longer aligns with our brand values. Unfortunate public perception issues. She dropped the phone onto the counter, buried her face in her hands, and whispered, "Dad, I've lost everything." I wanted to tell her that wasn't true. But part of me knew, for the first time in her life, she was finally facing what everything really meant. "Vanessa," I said, my voice steady, "you haven't lost everything. You've lost the things you mistook for everything." Her head snapped up, eyes red. "Easy for you to say you have millions. I have nothing now." I leaned forward. "No. You had nothing long before this because you built your life on what I gave you and what Derek promised. You never built anything of your own." The words landed like stone. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in weeks, she had no quick retort. Meanwhile, outside, the press had begun circling like hawks. A white SUV with tinted windows idled at the edge of the driveway. A man with a long lens camera crouched behind a snowbank. They weren't there for me. They wanted shots of the heiress who toasted too soon. By evening, national outlets had picked up the story. CNN ran a segment titled, "When Family Money Goes Wrong." Fox Business called it, "The Aspen Lesson Entitlement and Legacy Collide." Vanessa's name was everywhere, but not the way she had dreamed. She paced the living room, frantic. "Dad, how do I fix this? Tell me what to do." I thought about Margaret's words, "Don't fight to be right, fight to do right." I thought about my prayers asking for wisdom instead of wrath. And I realized this was the moment. You don't fix it by hiding. You don't fix it by blaming me or Derek or anyone else. You fix it by learning. You fix it by starting over. And you fix it by facing the fact that money and mansions don't mean a damn thing without character. Her lip quivered, but she didn't argue. Outside, the snow was falling again, soft and steady, covering the mountain in silence. I poured another cup of coffee and handed it to her. She wrapped her hands around it like a child, and for just a flicker of a moment, I saw the little girl who used to sit by this same fire, cocoa mustache on her face, dreaming of Christmas mornings. The storm wasn't over yet. But the avalanche had already buried the old illusions. Now it was up to Vanessa to dig her way out. 2 days after the headlines burned her name into every screen in Denver, Vanessa came back to the lodge. This time she didn't roar up the driveway in her Bentley or sweep through the door in designer heels. She came in quietly, shoulders slumped, wearing jeans and a plain sweater. For the first time in years, she looked less like a queen on parade and more like a daughter who had lost her way. She sat across from me at the kitchen table. No champagne, no cameras, no audience, just the 2 of us and the steady hum of the old furnace. "Dad," she whispered, "I don't know what to do. I've lost Derek. His family won't even take my calls. My brand deals are gone. My friends, well, I guess they weren't really friends. And you," her voice broke, "you don't look at me the same anymore." I folded my hands the way I always did when I was fighting to keep calm. "Vanessa, I'll always be your father. But being your father doesn't mean protecting you from every consequence. Sometimes it means letting you face them." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Am I ever going to earn back your respect?" I leaned back in my chair and let the silence settle. Then I said, "Respect isn't inherited, sweetheart. It's built. Brick by brick, the same way I built Alpine Holdings. And if you want to rebuild with me, you start small. With honesty, with humility, with work that doesn't come with a spotlight." She nodded slowly. For once, she wasn't looking for an easy exit. She was listening. I reached for the Bible on the counter, the same one I'd prayed over when her mother passed, the same one I'd turned to a week earlier when the legal threats arrived. I opened it and read aloud. "The Lord doesn't measure us by what we own, but by what we honor." Vanessa's shoulders shook. She pressed her palms together like a child in Sunday school and whispered, "I forgot that. I thought having more meant being more. I thought if I looked powerful, I'd be respected. But I was wrong." I closed the book. Faith isn't just about believing when life is easy. It's about trusting when the bottom falls out and finding strength to climb back up. That's where you are now, Vanessa. At the bottom. But you don't have to stay there. She wiped her face and looked at me with eyes I hadn't seen in decades. Eyes that weren't calculating or demanding, just searching. "Would you help me start over? I'll guide you," I said gently. "But I won't rescue you. There's a difference. You'll have to walk this road on your own 2 feet. That's the only way you'll ever value where it leads." For a long time we sat in silence. Outside, the snow fell steady against the pines, blanketing the world in quiet. Inside, for the first time in years, there was peace between us. Before she left, Vanessa touched the old oak table. "This lodge, I see it now. It's not about money, is it? It's about everything you built here." I nodded. It was never about the house. It was about legacy. And legacy isn't passed down like a piece of jewelry. It's lived and it's earned. She hugged me then, tentative, fragile, but real. And when she pulled away, I saw not the heiress who had once toasted to her forever home, but a woman humbled by the weight of truth. After she left, I stepped onto the porch, the cold air filling my lungs. I looked at the mountains, eternal, unshaken reminders that no storm lasts forever. And I whispered a final prayer, "Thank you, Lord, for giving me the strength to act and the patience to wait. And thank you for reminding me that sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that save us." I don't know what Vanessa's path will look like from here, but I do know this: she has a chance to rebuild. And I have peace the kind money can't buy. If this story moved you, I want to ask you one last thing. Follow Brian's story and share it with someone who needs it. Because sometimes the richest legacy isn't money or mansions. It's the courage to say enough and the faith to start again.